number 27. How about us? Watch out.
That's divisible by 9.
You're better at that than I am. Well, welcome everyone back. We are an almost perfect podcast, and I'm sure Tom and Brad, they're out saving the world somewhere, and here,
Yes,
Wade and John are here hosting a podcast.
I saw them earlier.
You did see them earlier?
I'm Wade Lindstrom. I saw them earlier. They were in tights and capes, and they are out saving the world for sure.
Not the Monday morning image I wanted to have, but thank you, Wade. You're always a good friend in times of turmoil.
I try to bring you up to date and interesting images.
Very good. You've done a very good job with that. So I don't know, man. Do we want to talk about the event-filled week we all had last week, or not? Or we just want to kind of blow over that and pretend that never happened?
What happened?
It got cold.
Yeah.
And you lost power and water at your house?
Power, water, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I had intermittent power for a couple of days, and then it came on permanently Wednesday morning, super early, like 1:30 in the morning. And then we had water sometime Thursday.
Man, this is rough stuff. I mean, all joking aside, like we actually felt bad. Our water, we lost water pressure a little bit for a couple of days. On Sunday night, as everything started, the lights flickered just a little bit, but that was it. And so the whole time we're like, reading on Facebook about everybody without power and, this and that. We're like, kids, turn off all the lights and, let's do the best we can, to kind of, preserve stuff and, don't tell anybody we got power. We don't want to sound like we're bragging or anything. It was just
I didn't get the invite.
Yes, you did. You didn't have power. You didn't get it. I'm sorry. It was you didn't get it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, did you send it over an electronic device?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Good idea.
Oh, good idea. Man. I saw several churches. I won't say a lot, but several that I saw had to cancel Ash Wednesday.
We were one of them.
You were one of them? Okay. And I saw several churches doing Ash Wednesday on Sunday. Did you do that?
I didn't do Ash Wednesday on Sunday, although we, as far as like imposition of ashes or anything, but at the beginning of the service, we did acknowledge that, and we had a prayer and some liturgy about that, and then Lenten discipline and that kind of thing, just to make sure we didn't gloss over that.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah.
Since we had power, I did something here from the house, and so we were able to at least host something, and people, there were a good handful of people there, live as we did it, and afterwards I think people joined in after it was over, and so we were able to do that. But this whole pandemic, it's been a big disruption, and of course this weather pattern we had this past week was a big disruption. I don't think anybody was looking forward to. Are you good with disruption? Do you handle that well?
Yeah, I handle it well because I just pretend it didn't happen. In the moment, I pretend it's not happening. So.
And everybody else around you appreciates that?
I don't know. I just sort of I'm a bit of a chameleon. I take on whatever's going on around me and try to make people feel better about whatever's going on with them. And it didn't really, honestly, I was bored some with no power, and I was cold a little bit, but there was there were people a lot worse off than I was. So I didn't, it was a little bit of a, just annoying, but nothing was ever in danger. I wasn't in peril or anything like that. So it didn't seem like a really good thing to wring my hands about.
When did you decide to cancel Ash Wednesday? Like how far in advance, or how long do you wait to like make that final decision like that?
Well, when the power wasn't on Wednesday morning at the church, it hadn't been on at all. That's when I decided.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I'm glad I did, because I realized later that we hadn't lit the boiler that heated that building. So it was not, even if we had power, it wasn't going to be pretty.
Yeah, our AC system's a little weird. You have to, I don't know, there's a whole process and initiation that you have to do every time you want to turn on the heater. And we hadn't done that. And yeah, that sanctuary was cold. So I'm glad we didn't do that either. Anyway, so Lord help us. Hopefully, I think that's the end of winter. If not, we may need to have some words with Father Winter.
Well, I mean, that was the winter of all winters. So whatever we get from here is not going to seem like winter, I think.
Everybody was happy, on Friday because it was 40 degrees.
Right.
Heat wave.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So
I'm in Austin right now, and it was 7 degrees here. So
still?
No, it was.
Oh, it was.
Not today. It's beautiful today.
Yeah. I was gonna say I didn't realize anybody else was still cold. So, all right. So, Wade, are you paying too much for your internet?
I'm sure I am.
I am too. I every month like it gets higher and higher. I'm like, well, what's happening? I'm not changing anything. How far would you go to protest your internet, your slow internet in particular?
Well, mine's not slow, so I don't feel like it's slow. So
you got good internet. Our kids complain about ours, but I have to remind them we've got like 18 devices connected to Wi-Fi. I'm not even joking, man. There's iPads
at the same time.
Almost sometimes,
Oh man, you're gonna have to get a second internet address.
Amazon, what is it? Alexa. There's a Google, whatever that is, and and so it hampers our internet speed sometimes. And then you got school going all day long, and then you got podcasts. Who even does that, right? So anyway,
right.
So California man. 90-year-old California man was having slow internet issues. And
90?
90.
I'm just impressed that a 90-year-old guy's pissed about his internet speed. That's amazing.
So, well, wait until this is hilarious, actually. So he lives in California, North Hollywood neighborhood. And he said his internet, AT&T internet, was like watching a slideshow. I think that's hilarious. Observation.
There was a time in his life where slideshow was cutting edge, man.
It's a new thing. You remember making those in school? Did you ever do that?
Oh, I got a funny story to tell you off air about that.
Okay, all right. We'll be back, folks, after this break.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sidebar.
Anyway, he's been a loyal AT&T customer since 1960. Talk about brand loyalty. I don't know that we have that as much anymore like that.
Well, anyway, in 1960, that was the only game in town. So
the only internet service in 1960, right?
Well, yeah, that was the only internet you could get.
So he's been a loyal.
I think they still did have the AOL CDs back then, though.
Yes. Where you get 100 minutes per CD. Oh, you remember how excited?
1,000. You can get 1,000 minutes, man. You got the wrong CD.
I can remember getting one of those CDs like 1 month and be like, I don't know, 500 minutes. And then the next one was like, I was like, oh my gosh, they doubled the internet.
Right.
We were so.
I had more AOL email addresses than anybody on the planet.
AOL still, you can still get an AOL email address, I think.
I'll get right on that.
I can't remember who has one. They sent me an email like, is that vintage? Anyway, AT&T loyal customer since 1960. He kept calling AT&T to talk about faster internet speed, and they kept saying, it's coming, don't worry. What blew him over is that he started seeing all these ads about, the faster internet speed, getting new people to sign up and so on and so forth. And so he had enough, and he decided to take an old-fashioned way to solve a modern problem. He took out a newspaper ad in 2 editions of the Wall Street Journal, one in New York and one in Dallas, where AT&T headquarters is. Can you guess how much this man spent on his ads to complain about his slow internet?
Thousands of dollars.
How about $10,000?
Yeah. That sounds light to me, honestly, but that's great. Yeah.
But to complain about slow internet?
So he's in North Hollywood, and they don't have like Google Fiber or Giga Power.
He gave him something now because they put out the ads, and he got direct responses. And not too long after that, they got faster internet in his neighborhood. And I don't know that we have a follow up to see if it's fine or not, but
Are we sure he wasn't on dial-up?
no, man, like you said, this guy knows what he's doing. Matter of fact, he says, we've been at home all this year. My wife and I, we like to watch Netflix and stream our movies and stuff. So he knows what he's doing, man. He wants
Yeah.
this fast internet, and he is willing to pay $10,000 to bark about it. Um, I don't know if I'm willing to pay any much more than my monthly bill to bark about it, quite frankly, but I'd rather just
Yeah.
complain.
Well, he couldn't go on Facebook and do it because everybody there is complaining and nobody cares.
It sound like the grumpy old man, right? Darn
Huh?
internet users, get off my Wi-Fi.
Get off of my virtual lawn.
Anyway, all right. So I thought that was interesting. There's a lot you could probably use that for and talk about later. But anyway, if you're having slow internet, just take out thousands of dollars worth of advertisement in the newspapers and let AT&T know about it. That's all you got to do. You got to do. So problem solved. All right. So speaking of high numbers, Wade, you know this, I know this. I'm hoping more people know this and get this. But over the weekend, the U.S. surpassed 500,000 deaths related to COVID. And I think we just got to let that set in for a moment. It was crazy when we talked about going over 100,000, and then it was 200, and then we kept going, and then snowstorms and riots and insurrections kind of, gave us something else to talk about. And all the while, now we are over 500,000 people dead because of the virus. I don't know, man. When you see that number, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I don't really know how to wrap my wrap my head around that number. Honestly, I mean, I think about I guess the comparisons that I've seen have been comparisons to like deaths because of war or stuff like that, and um, and really we're creeping up on some numbers that um, exceed some of our worst war deaths. We had I looked this up this morning. We had something like over 400,000 Americans died in World War II.
Yeah.
And so that was a war, right? And it stretched out over several years.
Yep.
And we're talking about a year max that we've lost 500,000 Americans. And we, there's some of us that don't really seem to latch on to any of that. I mean,
well, you probably still have some people who are like, well, that number is probably inflated, right? That it can't be that many. It's
okay, let's say it's inflated.
and it's
maybe
100,000, right?
Let's say it's inflated, 100 or 50%. Maybe it's 50% of that. Say it's 250, which it's not, but
right.
I mean,
how's that?
Yeah, I mean on 9/11. Yeah, 9/11. How many people we lose? It was like I don't know, like I think it was around 3,000, wasn't it?
I think just under, yeah, 29 something.
9/11. Yeah, it was 2977.
Yeah. So Wade, obviously you don't follow my Facebook. That's okay. I put something up this morning. It's I don't know who the person is. Some pastor. He's a rev apparently. And I just put a screenshot of his tweet this morning. It says 521,500 Americans were killed in World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, both Iraq wars, and the war in Afghanistan combined.
Combined. Wow.
And here we are a year into the pandemic and 500,000 people. So I was listening to a short podcast from NPR talking a little bit about this and talking about the, this is, if we could talk about this in a much lighter note, we could probably make some good jokes, but psychic numbing. That's the term that came out of this podcast, which comes from what's his name, a psychologist named Paul Slovic, and it talks about how we as humans we don't seem to have the capability, at least by ourselves, to sort of handle these large numbers and how to respond to them in a kind of humane way. And that you would think, if one person dies, that's a big deal. And we say, oh man, one person died, that's horrible. And you would think as that number increases, so would our empathy and so would our outrage or our willingness to help or to do things to, you know, correct a wrong if needs be, whatever. But as that number grows and grows, what tends to happen is our empathy decreases, and we lose an ability to show compassion and empathy as at large. So it's, in other words, like you said, like we have 500,000 people, and it's like, what does that even mean? Like, how do I even wrap my mind around that? And so consequently, we kind of just, by and large, go about our day as if that number doesn't mean anything. So I sent you the deal. You had a chance to listen to it. What do you think when you heard some of that, and if you've already had some thoughts about that? This idea about psychic numbing.
Well, I don't, I had never heard that before today, and psychic numbing. Um, I I get that. I think it's pretty clear that that as a society, we probably, many of us, if not most of us, have not internalized what that number means. Um, the mere fact that people are willing to take a risk and go protest by not wearing a mask in a grocery store, and and make a fuss about that, you know, tells me that we got some messed up priorities in our society. Even if you don't believe that a mask is effective, um, I mean, why would you? I mean, is that really? If you didn't, if you had any inkling as to what those numbers represented in families, um, I don't think you would be so quick to do, crazy, risky things like, you know, have a New Year's Eve party, or
Right.
a block party, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it makes me wonder, and it's kind of the point of
I don't know.
kind of point to some of this is it makes me wonder when you have people who do those kind of things. Have you had anybody close to you suffer as a result of this? Have you had anybody close to you pass away as a result of this? And my inclination is to guess that no, they haven't, because if they had, maybe they'd be a little more compassionate and have a little more willingness to back up a little bit and kind of think about what you're saying and how this makes other people feel. If so I've had conversation with some pastors who had churches. Their churches were kind of like, no, we're not closing, and it's we don't need to da 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 da. And I say, well, our church, we had a couple people that passed away from this, and that kind of gives you pause. At the very least, gives you
Yeah,
pause, right? And so it's this idea that as the number grows, the number doesn't really mean too much to us because what are we going to do about it anyway, right? And instead of increasing our sincerity about let's get through this pandemic, let's and just using the pandemic as one example, this is much has been written about this before in terms of how people respond to genocide, how people deal with all kinds of casualties, like you said, related to war and everything. I don't remember who it was reading once about how in the narratives, the birth story of Jesus, when Herod kills the babies, right? And when we hear that, I think a lot of us tend, Herod killed all the babies, and oh my gosh, what is that? 100,000 babies? How many babies are there? And somebody did a little kind of little research and guess that maybe considering where it was and all that kind of stuff, population density and all that kind of stuff, that maybe that number was like I don't know, it was a low number, like 10 or 12, right? And then we're kind of like, oh, 10 or 12. Well, wait a minute. It's still
Right.
10 or 12. Why are we okay with saying, oh, it's not that big a deal then? Yes,
Yeah.
it's still 10 or 12 little babies, right? And so, this, and how that doesn't always work the other way. This should get us thinking more about how we can care for one another, how we can, make this better, how we can support each other, how we can get everything we need to have done completed so that we can be on the other side of this. But that's not our, apparently that's not our human nature, brother. We
Well, and some of it's
well,
just, Americans, we want what we want when we want it.
oh my goodness, yes.
And so you want what you want when you want it. And that's kind of our default, cultural standard, I think. You should be able to get more of what you want when you want it. If you have the means to do that. And so we come into this place where everybody, in order for this to work, everybody needs to take care of everybody else. So it's a kind of it's like a social contract that we all have to enter into. And to the degree that we have people that are unwilling to, which seems like we have a lot this time, um, that we don't succeed. I see that about 25% of people, in some poll I read yesterday, 25% of people in the United States will not get the vaccine. Well, we need to be between 65 and 75% vaccinated, according to CDC, to have herd immunity. So we've already got 75% or 25% who say no. In that same survey, there were 25% that weren't sure.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, all of a sudden, you're at, if you split that in half, you're at 62% if everybody can get out and get it that wants to, that thinks it's okay. Um, and as somebody my age, I'm a child of the vaccine, from the get go. I've got polio's vaccine scar on my arm, and I've had every vaccine that I can think of, and so far, to my knowledge, the government does not control me. So,
It's not what they told me.
huh?
It's not
Is
what
that
they
right?
told me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, um, so this stuff is comical, and I know there may be somebody watching this podcast today that thinks it's completely, what I'm saying is like really controversial, and for those of you who think that, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you, but I'm sorry for the rest of us too.
Well, and again, this is, it's tied to this idea. Okay, well, how many people have to die for this to like open somebody's eyes, right? How many people have to endure not just the death of it, but what they experience before they die? I mean, people on ventilators for weeks, and enduring all that. How many people have to go through that before we say, "Come on, y'all, let's live with a little more compassion." Uh,
Well, it's more than a half million.
it's going to be more than a half million, apparently.
And I mean, the other number that you don't even know about, or I don't, and you don't think about, is how many people have gone through this, survived, and still aren't right, or
Right.
or I talk to people who've had it, even people who are fine now, are like, you don't want this is the worst thing I ever went through. So how much sickness and trauma have people who didn't die gone through, and how many of those folks got to endure all of this? I mean, we're in the, I don't know how many. Do you know how many cases we're at now? I
I
mean,
haven't
if we
checked
get,
over the weekend now.
I mean, I'm sure, I bet worldwide we got to be approaching close to a billion, maybe. I don't know. What I don't know what the number is. I don't think there is a number. Um, I don't know. I think the guy that in the podcast is right. I think we got to focus less on statistics and more on stories. Um, we need to hear more stories about the effects of this, not just on people who died, but on families that
Families.
you know that are just it sometimes destroyed in some ways. because, this thing came along, and we're not unique. I mean, there have been times in history where we've had, plagues and epidemics and pandemics, and people died. And, my friend Harley, who's an intern at my church, we ought to have him on here one time. He's super cool. Um, his name is Harley. He's named after the motorcycle. And he was recently up in, it was either Ohio or Wisconsin, wherever the Harley big facility is. And he went to the Harley Davidson Museum. And there's a picture of when the Harley Davidson factory opened, which is right during, the picture was taken during the pandemic of, what was it, 1919, 1920, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Maybe.
And so it was very early in the history of Harley Davidson. And they had this picture of everybody at the factory, and they all had masks on, every one of them. And I'm like, wow, we should be able to learn something from that, shouldn't we?
So many parallels to that.
And masks have never been high tech, right?
That's right. So worldometers.info. I don't know anything about their website. They tell me over 112 million coronavirus cases, 2.4 million deaths worldwide. So, I mean, wow.
Wow. So we've got,
you do the math.
We've got about a quarter of the deaths are in our country.
And talking about your social contract, like you mentioned a while ago, I think it was New Zealand last week. They had been COVID free, they had locked down, and done all that stuff, and blah blah blah, and had reopened, and everybody was happy. One family tested positive after that, and they all went on lockdown again because of one family. But it was because this concern for one another, and the idea that we'll get through this when we get through this, and
yeah, I mean, it feels like, from what I've read about New Zealand in particular, is that not that you're forced to go on lockdown and you're going to get arrested. That doesn't seem to be what the feeling is. It's, we're going on lockdown because we care about each other and we want our country to not suffer. And that's a different mentality than for some of us here, and I don't even think I'm immune to that. I mean, I probably most of the time, when I'm walking back to my car after I forgot to put my mask on the way into the grocery store, I'm probably in the back of my mind thinking, this is a real pain in the neck. I don't always think, hey, this is my way of serving my neighbor. Now, when I think about it sort of intellectually or logically in a forum like this, that's an easy jump to make. But I think in my day to day, I don't know that my attitude's always all that great. I do not ever go anywhere without a mask, and I won't be going. But in my forgetfulness, when I remember, I think probably my default place is to say, this is really a pain.
Well, and that's when it starts to be an inconvenience to you, or where you take part of it, or some kind of consequence that you have to deal with, which seems to be, that's where a lot of people have started. This could have, or maybe it already has, some kind of consequence that I don't want. And we start with that instead of starting with the other part, that this actually has an impact on so many other people in ways that may be related to me. But a lot of times they're not. It's not just me that I'm going through this. But instead of starting with that this is something we're all dealing with, people are dying, blah blah blah, we start with, this is why it bothers me, and I'm not going to settle for it. Instead of reversing that and catching yourself when you do that, instead of leading yourself. So
well, and I'm sitting here right now. I'm in Austin. I'm not in Corpus Christi because my 82, almost 83-year-old mom is in the hospital with pneumonia and COVID, and I know how careful they've been, and she still got it, and so, and she's doing okay, but there is some fear and trepidation about all of this because we read that disease can go south in a hurry. So, so yeah, I bet for me my annoyance at masks is probably going to dissipate some. And
close to it.
And to me, and for me, That's a story. That's a narrative. My mom's not a statistic. She's my mom. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a reading from Adam Smith, who this is from 1759, right? So a
That
lot of
radio
times,
station,
I'm sorry.
1759. Is that AM or FM?
BC.
Oh,
So a lot of times,
whoa.
we have these conversations now, and there are people with that this is all political, and we're just trying to promote and agenda, all this kind of stuff. But you and I think right now, you called us a platform. Wow, wow, that's great. We are a platform.
Did
We
I call us a platform? Did I say that?
I think so. Oh no, you called us a forum. That's what you said. A forum.
Oh, okay,
It
good.
sounds actually more um, astute. So thank you for that. We've done
You're
it.
welcome.
Anyway. So
I'm kind of a stooty.
okay, I'm gonna get through this. But anyway, this has a connection to us, has a faith connection, because I mean this matters to us. I did a sermon on Ash Wednesday from the prophet Isaiah, and we're talking about what kind of fast does God require, and you know God tells the prophet to say, this is what I require that you essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, obviously, you care for each other, care for those in need. That's a part of how you live out your life, that's what God cares for, not your religious theatrics that you do just to get in good with God. And how this is a part of who we are that we have to figure out, that we've got to say, what can we do as church, as the body of Christ to not just recognize this, but do something about it. So anyway, let me read this to you. It's from something called the theory of moral sentiment. He says, let us suppose that the great empire of China, with all its myriads of inhabitants, was suddenly swallowed up by an earthquake, and let us consider how a man of humanity in Europe, who had no sort of connection with that part of the world, would be affected upon receiving intelligence of this dreadful calamity. He would, I imagine, first of all, express very strongly his sorrow for the misfortune of that unhappy people. He would make melancholy reflections upon the precariousness of human life and the vanity of all the labors of man, which could thus be annihilated in a moment. He would too, perhaps, if he was a man of speculation, enter into many reasonings concerning the effects which this disaster might produce upon the commerce of Europe and the trade and business of the world in general. And when all this fine philosophy was over, when all these humane sentiments had been once fairly expressed, he would pursue his business or his pleasure, take his repose or his diversion with the same ease and tranquility as if no such accident had happened. So in 1759, he's describing the same thing that you and I are talking about today, where we hear this 500,000 people, and it's kind of like, man, maybe we should do something about that, But then we just kind of go on about our day as if nothing has really happened. And so, as a church, learning how to, as Einstein put it, I wrote it down. You say, how to widen our circle of compassion. How can we, as the church, widen our circle of compassion so that when we hear these numbers like this, we learn to reflect on the reality that there are lives behind the numbers. How do we as a church, Wade, increase or widen our circle of compassion?
Well, I think I think we kind of do what we're supposed to do as a church. I'm hoping that most of our churches have a pretty wide circle of compassion to begin with. But it's loving our neighbor. It's having eyes to see where people are hurting or broken or grieving, and the thing I experience in churches a lot is that we're more interested in what's going on in our church than sometimes we are and other things going around the world. I don't have very many arguments or upheaval in the church that have to do with serving people. It always has to do with, you know, how do we, you know, what color is the carpet going to be, or, you know, who's in charge of this, or who's offended by this other person on this committee, or whatever it is. That seems to be where the most dramatic things happen in serving a church. And I would rather the dramatic things be, hey, we really made a difference in somebody's lives, or we got to really watch somebody transform, and we were a part of that. And so I think it's the thing that we try to do and we try to teach. And and it's not a place that you get to. It's a process. I think we call that something like sanctification in the church. And it's just, I think, tuning your heart into something different than the rest of the world might be tuned into. I think our society is tuned into, how do we beat this pandemic? Well, what's my political position about that? Am I still happy, overjoyed, and overwhelmed by the election, or am I still mad and I'm trying to whatever? Rather than, can we tune into what's going on around us? My church can't fix what's going on in, New York or Washington, D.C. or whatever, but we can deal with what's around us. And, I had an experience last week. I preached about it yesterday, where I was driving back and forth from my house to the church on Alameda. Oh, two to 4 to 6 times a day, checking on the church, even though nobody was there, but it was, we were waiting for a pipe to bust or something. And, my, Terry, my ex-wife, she was staying with us because her house was worse off than we were. And she said, "Hey, you think we could take some hot food to that lady over on the bus bench?" And I'm like, "What lady? What bus bench?" "It's the one in Alameda right there by HEB." And I'm like, I haven't seen her. "Well, she's been there for 3 days in a sleeping bag and hadn't moved." So we took food over there, and I felt like an idiot. I hadn't seen her at all, because I was focused on what was down the street that needed to be taken care of, and she needed more immediate care than my church building did.
Yeah. In church, you hear people talk about, let's pray for those in need, and that's a great prayer. But
right,
what happens often is that we neglect those in need who are sitting right next to us in church. It's easier to talk about than it is maybe easier to spot, to recognize, or maybe even to do something about. So, yeah, that's kind of where we are. So, just kind of in closing, if we're trying to make sense of what our church's mission is in making disciples and caring for the spiritual and whole well-being of people, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's people who do not have a home, whether it's abuse, whether it is lack of food or other basic resources, the needs that people have, those are real people of God. And in the church, we're called to be that people that cares, right? And the numbers mean something, right? But they also, we can't get lost in the numbers and just think like there's nothing we can do. There's a number we can always acknowledge, and that's the one that's in front of us, right? There's an old book.
Yeah.
You can't do everything, so do something, right?
Yeah. And and try to, whenever I see this stuff reported in the news, it's 500,000 deaths. Well, those are 500,000 people. Those are 500,000 lives. Those are 500,000 souls. Those are 500,000 individuals who were, if we believe what we believe about God loving us, he loved them too. And each of us may not have lost anyone. We may not know somebody who died, but each of those people have people who do, and and God lost 500,000 children this year just to that, not including everything else. And
Right.
so, if we're going to love God, I believe that God, when we cry or when we grieve, I believe God grieves as well. And God's had to do a lot more grieving than any of us this year. And if God grieves, I think we should be grieving proportionately if we can. And
Amen.
so, whatever that looks like for you, if it means praying or serving or going deeper in your own faith, and but yeah, I think you're right. Do something. Don't
I use it as a sermon illustration from time to time. Our world's favorite Bible verse is John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he did something.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. So, all right. Well, either way, as we think about our response as a church and as people of God, what it is that we can do to help each other. I mean, still looking at that number, 500, 500,000 people in 1 year because of one thing. It's heartbreaking, right? And we need to make give ourselves time to grieve and space to talk about how that impacts our walk with God and how we see the world. So good stuff, Wade. See, we didn't need Tom or Brad after all. Them or their tight leggings that they had. All right, I'm gonna give you one thing to look forward to, and then we're gonna get out of here.
What's that?
I'm gonna give you one thing to look forward to, and then we're out of here. Have you had a Chick-fil-A sandwich before?
I don't eat sandwiches because they have bread on them.
Oh,
I do have. I will go get a Chick-fil-A spicy chicken fillet.
Yes. Okay.
That's it. That just being it, and
Okay.
that pretty much makes my day right there.
So there's the chicken sandwich from or the chicken fillet from Chick-fil-A. Then there's the one from Popeyes, which is great. There are a few others that have responded, but coming soon.
Yeah.
Taco Bell enters the chicken sandwich wars with a taco version of a chicken sandwich. That's all I'll say. Friends, thank you for tuning in. If there's ever anything you want us to talk about to try to find a Christ-like response to, let us know. Call us, leave us a message. Next week, we'll be back and we'll see what we talk about. But until then, Wade, I appreciate your time. Hope all is well. Continue to pray for you and your family. Thanks for your wisdom and input, and everybody else. Thanks for tuning in. God be with you.
Take care, man.